Hello! That was a wonderful start.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Today we are Adventuresome Reviews, reviewing We Men of Ash and Shadow
by H.L. Tinsley.
A finalist in the Mark Lawrence Fantasy Book Blog-Off competition.
So you know it's already got all sorts of bells and whistles tinkling away at it.
It's like a whole Jingle Bells card all by itself. Except it's not, because it's a very, very dark book. So it's more of like, this is Halloween.
Yeah, with a great deal of funeral bells and such knots.
Yes.
Mournful cannons, if such a thing
And
exists.
brooding, staring off into grim horizons, and...
Yes. We Men of Ash and Shadow is the first book in the Vanguard series and follows the journey of protagonist John Vanguard through the dark and corrupt city of Deorsi, a grim-dark Gaslamp novel. And this is actually my first introduction to that. All things
No, it's not.
It's not?
Lamplighter is not grimdark, but it's Gaslamp, period.
I am rather taken with the genre of Gaslamp. And this book does fairly well with it. Anywho's, a grim, dark Gaslamp novel, We Men of Ash and Shadow explores themes of redemption, loyalty, and betrayal against the backdrop of a world where survival often means compromising your values. Amidst the Gaslamp shadows, former soldier turned mercenary John Vanguard hunts criminals at the behest of his current employer, Captain Felix Sanquain. Shamed by his deserter past and seeking to make amends for his many misdeeds, a chance encounter with Terran Lersac, a skilled young would-be assassin fallen from the graces of high society, leads Vanguard to become an unlikely mentor. Ooh, always like those type of stories. Charged with hunting down the killer of two guards left washed up on the banks of the canal, the further Vanguard delves into the underbelly of the city, the more he finds himself entangled in a web of secrets and lies. A prominent aristocrat is missing, crime lords, con men, and harlots run amok, and the city teeters on the brink of another revolution. It's a very, very tense book, actually. With his already precarious reputation hanging by a thread, Vanguard must piece together how and why the last war came to pass, find a way to earn redemption for his mistakes, and come to terms with the past in a city where very few survive and fewer can be trusted.
Your thoughts on the book?
Horribly depressing and dark and painful to the soul, but exceedingly well handled.
So I agree with the dark, and to some extent I agree with the well handled, because the prose is solid, and the characters are well constructed and morally gray as they are intended, and motivations and all, etc. But the flaw is that all the characters are like that. For the first 60% of the book is one note. Dark. The characters are grim and unemotive. Their moralities, their murdering, there's nothing particularly about any of the characters in the first 60% of the book. Or the world, and the world is dark. The characters are dark. The motivations are grim and gray, and even though John Vanguard's motivations are sort of inherently slightly noble and has good intentions, he is still a vigilante murderer at night, and while all of this is effectively handled, it becomes one note.
I suppose, but at the same time, it left me wanting that heroic figure to come in, that hint of change for Vanguard and the city, so that when that moment finally came and you had that swap off of grimdark to this barest potential glimmer of change, it was like, yes!
And I agree with you to some extent, but that's the only thing carrying you through the book, because it's not the mystery element of researching the crime, whatever, isn't even well integrated into the narrative.
Okay, so yeah, that was that was such a sideline.
But that's the point, is that the first 60% of the book has very little plot. You are in the city, being introduced to the city, being introduced to the characters. That is the large portion of the book, and almost the entire first 60% is introducing you to the setting, which is good, except the setting is, again, one note, and it's often separated from the driving plot, or...
Okay, I will admit that it kind of lacks direction. Or
No,
it's
not
even
lacks direction,
it's
it
not even-
lacks motivation.
Yeah, I suppose. But still, it's like so much of this book actually made me want things to happen. Right? You were introduced to characters, and John Vanguard is has residence at a brothel, right? And you were introduced to a couple of these girls in passing, and just how, because of how the story handles it and everything, you want these girls to be safe, right? And he's introduced to one in particular, and he goes out of his way to protect her a little bit, and it's just, you want these characters to be safe.
Except he doesn't go out of his way to protect her out of himself. He goes out of a way to protect her because he needs her for something, and the brothel owner says, if anything happens to her, you're in trouble. Or he understands that, so Vanguard, as a character, does not act out of his own motivations. He acts out because everybody tells him, you need to do this, and every action is in pursuit of what other people want.
To some extent, that is the point of the story, though. A large part of Vanguard's arc was him migrating from being an attack dog to an immoral master to being a self-actualizing character, and he's just barely starting that journey as the book begins. So probably everything that happens in this book is intentional, right? Which says a lot about the author, right?
Yes.
That is, for me, that assuages so many of the problems with the book because it feels intentional. It's like, sure, Vanguard spends 60% of the book just getting told what to do and pursuing the ends of others, but that is intentional. It's part of his character arc. There's not a single plot beat in the story that is not exactly what the author wanted.
Yes, I agree entirely, but it still does not change the fact that the first 60% of the book is a chore. Not so much a chore, but is a slog to get through.
I did not slog to get through the book. Mostly, admittedly, I was riding heavily upon okay, when is this book going to switch to actually give us a glimmer of potential? Because the city is dark and painful. There's suffering all around, right?
And I may have been more invested if there was a tease other than being maybe a potential inverse or reverse or a glimmer of light at the end of the book or at some point, but there never was. Vanguard individually never has any glimmer of potentially changing.
He changes at the end.
He changes at the end, but like in the first 60%.
Okay.
He has no internal self-actualized or even external motivated to potential to change. So the book never even makes any promise of change. So you're just left sitting in the mire wondering, is this book going to give me something worth rooting for? Eventually it does, and that's where the book picks up for me. Because you hit that 60% mark, and suddenly you have that glimmer of hope. You have the character who actively wants to make positive change.
Really well, because it's like Vanguard is a character who is locked in his ways. The world is dark, and there's nothing I can do to change that. So even though he himself is immoral and not super moral, but slightly moral, and a character who wants to do no harm,
or at least wants to do more good than harm.
Right. That's actually a really good way to describe it. He wants to do more good than harm. But he's locked in his way, so he cannot break out of this path that he's on. And all of a sudden, he meets this character, right? And this character is really good because he has a bright vision for the future. It's like, things can be better. And this almost chance meeting actually is what kickstarts Vanguard's own resurrection, per se.
And then at this point in the book, Vanguard develops autonomy and agency of his own, and you as the reader see something like, oh, that is potentially, you want that to happen, and then it suddenly makes the antagonist of the book far more threatening because they have something that they can take away from you / the characters / the reader. And this is where the book really kicked into gear for me. Especially this is where the Terry and Learsac narrative finally came to a head. And like it showed what the author was trying to do with the character. And that is potentially the best, but definitely one of the best Terrian, what's the word?
Character.
Portrayals of a sociopath. Not sociopath. Is it psychopath or sociopath?
It's kind of both. Okay, so Tyrion Lesac is
I don't want to get into too much detail.
is Vanguard's apprentice, right? And Tyrion Lesac has this drive to kill, right? Which is incredibly interesting because for the first half of Tyrion's life, he's like 20 years old. For the last 10 years, he's been suppressing this urge, right? And so he is this tightly wound spring that wants to kill so badly, right? So he is sociopathic, but he's not psychopathic to the extent where he wants to hurt per se. And so then he meets John Vanguard, and I actually really like this because John Vanguard they interact, and John Vanguard says, okay, John Vanguard gives him a direction with which to cause the least potential harm with this urge to kill while also actually killing, right? Because the way Vanguard works is...
very Dexter-ish. I don't know if you'll get that reference, but that's John Vanguard's...
Okay, Dexter. Okay. Vanguard's boss sends Vanguard to kill...
undesirables.
Criminals who stepped out of line, are doing things that that is not making the boss money, or skimping the boss, stuff like that. But only criminals. And the worst of the society. And so Vanguard offers Tyrion Lesac this chance at a life where killing benefits society to some minor degree. And this lends itself to... This is like the first glimmer of hope the book gets. And this arc goes exceedingly well, right?
Yes.
And there's spoilers, so I really can't spoil it, but...
It's just one of the best handled sections of the book.
Not for this book, but for other books too. It is a really well handled plot arc.
Yes. Now, to throw in a little bit of negative, John Vanguard is borderline useless.
I was gonna get around to this.
There is maybe, unless he's like facing red shirts, criminal red shirts of the underworld, there's barely a situation where he does not need to be bailed out by some of his other people. And he's a super-powered, very, very light fantasy. So, but there is magic, and then he can basically make himself
invisible.
Not necessarily invisible, just people can't notice him. And so, very effective for assassins and murderers.
Low-key overpowered, really, for such a light magic novel.
Yes. And that's what Terry Learsac has as well. But Vanguard, despite being old, which is like the one...
Experienced, an ex-soldier.
There's rarely an instance where he does not need help in fighting people to get himself out. And it's not even just like, they team up together to survive from the start. No, he fights somebody alone and then gets bailed out. And even it happens most egregiously, even in the cumulative fight of the book, where he's finally adopted all he could, or he's finally fully settled on becoming all that he could be, on having hope, and he goes on to take on this dangerous, lethal opponent that no one else should be able to fight. And he goes, I have the advantage here with experience and heritage, and then he has to get bailed out, and he doesn't even successfully kill the guy in the end, and it's just, you're useless.
He is never given a moment to shine apart from his knowledge of the underworld. He is experienced in the underworld.
He gets one little moment of deadly flare and flash.
And he's not even allowed to be simplistically powerful, wherein it's like he goes the simple basic route without panache or flair. You know, he's just not allowed to be effective. It's like unless he's hunting down a criminal for Captain
Red
Felix
shirt.
or Red Shirt, somebody who's not even the character in the book, he gets manhandled by people who really should not be manhandling him. And then you compare this to Terran Lursak, and Terran
Same skill set, significantly less
uses it so much better with significantly less experience. It gets to the point where it's like, if he was a bad guy, he would be terrifying.
Yes.
And you're actually given these 1 or 2 scenes where he's allowed to be terrifying because it's part of his character arc.
Yeah.
And it works really well because he's like we said, he's a sociopath, so it's like if he went dark, he would go very dark.
Yeah. And so it was just underwhelming of a main protagonist.
And even kind of the ending of the book kind of left me dissatisfied because that instead of
it's one of those books where you have a huge arc for characters and plot points, and at the end of the book, nothing was achieved. And so it feels like a little bit of a wasted book.
Yeah, the only step forward that was taken was Vanguard becoming heroic. And the moment he tried that, he obviously got murked. So it's just... That being said, I am interested in reading secondary...
I'm not. But you can obviously read
that's
this. Like,
deeply unfortunate.
You have money. You have time. You have
I'm broke. I got 2 pennies to my name, and I was mugged for those yesterday.
You have 1 penny.
By you.
Yeah.
He gave 1 back, which is why I only have 1 now, but still.
I put the other one in the penny stock. I'm going to make buku cash.
This is just deeply unfortunate.
For you. For me, it was the easiest mugging of my life.
I don't know where you got that chloroform from, but I am deeply aggrieved.
Do you have anything else to say? I think I've conveyed pretty much all my opinions on the book, aside from the rating.
No, I think we covered everything.
I would have given the book...
Oh, wait. Characters, though, character was well handled.
Yes.
Every character was distinct.
No. That's where I disagree. You did not have a truly distinctive character until you hit the 40% book. Because you remember, every other character was grim, life is rough.
Yeah, okay.
And they're not emotive. They don't bark with anger. They barely laugh. They don't grin, smile. They are grim, but you will do this to survive. And while that is realistic for their situation, it makes them boring to read.
Okay, I guess, but maybe it would be better to say that each character has distinctive motivations.
They're well-structured characters, distinctive motivations.
And Felix Sanquine is a great villain.
Yes.
Right?
Well, I wouldn't say great. He is...
far better than many we encounter, right?
I prefer the secondary villain that shows up. I feel like that's the real standout villain. Sanquine is...
He is an unpowered individual who's smart and brutal, but not unnecessarily brutal.
Yeah.
And it's like, he is a figure of power who deserves to be in power.
Yes, and for me, it's just Sanquine as a character doesn't really pop. He's, like, the character archetype of, like, the brutal but efficient, the lawful evil, I believe would be his designation, is an effect. He handled that effectively, but that's what he is. He is a well-executed archetype.
Yeah.
And mildly interesting in some of his motivations, but it's the secondary villain that really shines.
To some extent, though, I also really like him because he uses power well, to the extent that Vanguard can't just turn around, stab the guy, right? There's danger involved with every meeting of Felix Sanquine.
Yes, exactly. He is well executed, he is dangerous, he is potent, he just doesn't pop.
Okay.
Like, he pops a little, but he's like a 7 out of villains. Well executed, effective in the story. He's not, whatever. There's some great villains out there. He's not the Joker.
Yeah, okay.
I would give him the book 3.5 stars. Well executed, just a little bit
I was probably going to give it 4.5. I quite like the book.
Luckily, no one listens to you.
They really should. I am a fount of wisdom.
A dry fount. You got a little crack running through your center. Every now and then you see
The
vermin peek
contractor's
out.
coming tomorrow. Stop bullying me.
Every now and then you see a clown peek out, look around, sees little children, goes back under.
I resent the clown. I am not creepy.
There's mold.
Mold is good. It's life, at least. Just says I'm damp somewhere.
It's poisonous mold.
Well, fine
From
then.
the rain, because it only ever rains on you. The entire rest of the city is bone dry, but it rains specifically on the perfect circumference of your well.
I
But you
can't tell
never
if that's
fill
good
up
or
with
bad,
water.
considering the half of the city is dry. But anyway, doodles.
Au revoir.